Welcome back, everybody. Monday, December 4th. John Aravosis here. A couple minutes late, but, dog has to do what a dog's got to do. So I had to deal with her first. Welcome back. I am here in Chicago, coming to you from lovely, cold, but not too cold Chicago, to talk about the latest news from Ukraine and Israel. We're going to do it in that order today. Lots of Ukraine news, not a lot of Israel news, but big Israel news. So in other words, not a lot of presentation of the news, but some big news going on. Introduce yourselves, guys, while I go on TikTok here and get my TikTok rolling on my iPad. Hang on a second here. Introduce yourselves, if you would, where you're from. Hang on. Cleaning my iPad out. Boom, boom. Here we go. TikTok. Anyway, welcome all. Here we go. TikTok live. Probably got the wrong name. I do have the wrong name in here because we did our coffee talk this weekend. Just got to change that name. Hang on a second. I'll do Ukraine and Israel. Let's see if I got enough space here. War updates. Yes, I do have enough space. Ukraine and Israel war updates. Go live. Boom. Excellent. Hey, Carl. Melbourne. Lovely. Jens in Sweden. Cool. Oh, I didn't hit go live. Go live. There we go. All right. Razan in Iraq. I seem to remember your name. I think you're the person who was here from Iraq before. I think so. The second name doesn't sound familiar, but the first name, Razan, does. Oh, hey, guys. Hey, Richard. Oh, anyway, hello, guys. Oh, there come the TikTokers. Hey, TikTokers. Hey, Big Hawk. All right, there we go. Woo woo! Thank you, Big Hawk. First TikTok gift, always welcome. Ryan. Oh boy, how are folks doing today? Christmas shopping already? 3 weeks of Christmas. Vernon says, I know. I have not bought a single Christmas gift yet. Thank you, Crazy American. So that's got to happen soon. Get those rolling. I'm not going to yawn at you already. Don't yawn already. I even just had coffee. So I'm probably going to be like more hyper than usual, yet yawning. Thank you, Shane. I kind of do that mix. I get tired, I do coffee, and I'm still tired, but I'm hyper. It's a little weird. Thank you, Jonathan and Pam and Derek and Jonathan and Super Hornet for the gifts on TikTok. Anyway, how are we doing, folks? What else is going on? I'm going to start in a minute. As always, we'll wait like a minute or so to start until some of the more TikTokers and YouTubers arrive. So we will start shortly. Thank you, Jetta. Chazak and Pam. Richard. I know I'm going to forget. I'm going to miss some people here. I know it. Flying Medic. Hey, I don't recognize your name. Welcome. Adventures. Thank you for sharing the live. All right, guys. Another half minute. We'll get going. Hey, Boppo and Gottenberg. Cataract surgery. I've had it. It's easy. Don't worry. Thank you, Chazak. I'm in Chicago until early January. Other than being next week, I go to Phoenix for a week. So I'll probably have an intermittent live schedule when I'm in Phoenix. So we'll do several, but maybe not every day. We'll see. Hey, Pam, thanks for sharing the live. Thank you, Lori. I'm yawning at you guys already. I shouldn't be yawning. Hello, Yvonne. All right, guys, I'm going to get rolling. So welcome all. This is my nightly show. I do Monday to Friday, 6 o'clock Eastern, where I talk about sort of the latest kind of international national security news, mostly focused on Ukraine. Lately, we've been covering Israel and Gaza as well, because obviously it's a big story. Thank you, Martin, for the gift. Little bit of American news. Don't really have any American news today. Thank you, Jeremy. But if there's sort of big American news, especially with the election coming up, thank you, Kim. I'll cover a little bit of that too. But anyway, today's news is going to be Ukraine and Gaza and Israel. I pretty much go through the news that I think is important. Then you guys can ask questions. Thank you, Mustard. But if anybody's got questions, you really got to, thank you, Eddie, that you want to get out now, feel free to post them. But I don't usually get to too many of the questions while I'm going through the news first. But having said that, I'm always, what's this doing? I'm always happy to do, thank you, Alex, to answer a super chat question on YouTube, YouTube super chat questions you guys pay for. If you do, I will answer those immediately. And please, thank you as well for the gifts on TikTok. I'll always do a shout out for those. Thank you, Marcy, for those gifts, the ones that pop up in the air. Just remember, guys, I do this full time and I do it for free. So your gifts really do matter. They quite literally pay my bills to keep me doing this. So please keep them coming. Thank you very much. Let's get rolling, guys. All right, let's start with Ukraine. There's a lot of Ukraine news. And then some Israel news, although it's big, the Israel news, but it's not a lot of news. So we'll talk about that in a minute too. Thank you, Succeed, Ellie, Andre. Thank you. And running on coffee. Thank you, guys. So today's day 646 of Putin's 3-day special military operation. The U.S. is set to run out of funds for Ukraine. Thank you, Ellie. By the end of the month, the Biden administration sent a letter to Congress saying they just have enough money for the next 3 weeks, and then we are out. They said 97% of the money has been spent from the Defense Department. That leaves around $2 billion, but it pretty much gets them through the month, and that's it. Congress is playing games. Republicans are saying that the Biden administration hasn't come around. Now, just to sort of recap where Congress was on this, okay? MAGA Republicans take over the U.S. House of Representatives. The MAGA Republicans, pretty anti-Ukraine, pretty pro-Putin because of Trump, right? But starting to show a little wiggle room depending. They pass a bill to aid Israel. They don't pass one for Ukraine. They pass one to give money to Israel, about $14 billion, and they claim they're paying for it by cutting money for the Internal Revenue Service, which is our tax agency. Well, the Congressional Budget Office, which is the independent body in Congress, totally independent, nonpartisan, that looks at legislation and figures out how much does the legislation cost, how much does it save. They determined that this legislation was actually going to cost money because not only are we giving the money to Israel, but the money that we're cutting, thank you, adventurers, the money we're cutting from the tax agency is actually going to decrease revenue. That we're cutting money from the tax agency, which means they have to get rid of staff. And the staff would have gone after people who don't pay their taxes. So the Republicans actually passed a bill that actually doesn't help Israel. It doesn't work for Israel. They didn't even pass a bill for Ukraine. That one, nothing. Bad news on that front. Lindsey Graham, who's a big defender of Ukraine among Republicans in the Senate, went about face yesterday, which again, very bad news. Graham is now saying that he's not going to do anything on Ukraine until Democrats do something about the southern border with Mexico, which, it's bad because Graham initially was saying, we've got to help Ukraine, we've got to help Ukraine, we've got to help Ukraine. That's just bad. It's stupid too. I mean, I will say this. I don't quite, and we can get into sort of the whole border debate. I don't quite get Democrats' fixation with, how do I know to put this? It's not a fixation. It's a lack of a fixation. Democrats seem really, okay, here's the thing. Republicans are a little crazy about the border. I mean, there's a lot of problems with immigration across the border, but they're kind of manic about it, and they're using it as a political issue, I think. Having said that, Democrats are kind of using it in reverse as a political issue. Thank you, Running. In the same way that Republicans will always talk about immigration on our southern border, but it's kind of bullshit. I mean, I don't think they care as much as they're using it for politics. Democrats won't talk about it because of politics. It's the same problem. Democrats have this crazy idea, and it is true. Latinos, about 2/3 of Latinos, something like that in America, are people of Latin American origin, are Democrats. And Democrats have this crazy idea that if we clamp down on, immigration, Latinos will get mad. The thing is, I'm not convinced that's true. I think a lot of Latinos you talk to are actually rather conservative on a lot of these issues. So I'm not at all concerned that's true. But nonetheless, that's what's going on. You've got Republicans, I think, are overreacting for politics, and Democrats are underreacting for politics. And unfortunately, it's going to hurt Ukraine aid, which is not great. In any case, that's what's up with that. Let me see what else we got here. A little bit of update on what's going on in Ukraine. British Ministry of Defense says that overall, they put out some new estimates of how many Russian troops have been killed and injured in Ukraine. They say overall, the Russians have suffered around 220,000 to 280,000 wounded in Ukraine, which is a huge number, and approximately 70,000 killed, which again is a huge number. The number I always like to point to with this is that with Afghanistan, when the Russians invaded Afghanistan, right, in the 1980s, they lost 14,500 men approximately. I think it's 14,453 or something like that. And that was considered astronomical. This is over a 10-year period, okay? 14,000 men over 10 years was horrific. And it helped bring down the Soviet Union. It helped cause domestic protests by moms and everything else, right? This time around, the Russians have lost 70,000, and they've lost them in 2 years. That's a lot more than 14,000 in 10 years. Yet, we're not seeing the protests back in Russia, which is bad. A little more here, 70,000 killed. British Ministry of Defense estimates between 290,000 and 350,000 total Russian combatant casualties, but that includes Well, so that includes basically wounded, 220,000 to 280,000 wounded, and 70,000 killed. Now, this was an interesting point that the British Ministry of Defense threw in. Listen to this. Even among Russian officials, there is likely a low level of understanding, thank you, Chief, a low level of understanding about total casualty figures because of a long-established culture of dishonest reporting in the military. So basically that the Russians themselves, the military, may not know how many men they've lost because they lie. Thank you, adventurers. That basically, everybody wants to look good, right? Thank you, Marie. So nobody wants to report to their boss that they lost a lot of men. So they lie and they say, we didn't lose as many. And then the boss might lie when he gives the number. So it's almost like that telephone game where every person lies a little bit as it goes up because each one wants to look good so that they never really report the actual casualties, which is insane, obviously, to run a war. Russia did confirm that a General Vladimir Zavadsky, was killed in Ukraine on November 28th. I think I mentioned this at the time, but what's interesting about it is Russia doesn't usually confirm when their generals are killed. This time they did, which is good, meaning it's true. Ukrainian operatives used 2 drones to destroy Russian ammunition and equipment depots near the occupied city of Svatove in the eastern Luhansk region. That's eastern Ukraine. Another separate report, Ukraine is changing its battle tactics and moving to defense in certain areas while continuing the counteroffensive, according to an aide to Zelensky. Now, my friend Vlad in Ukraine mentioned this weekend during our live that we did on Saturday, and Vlad was worried about this, basically saying that there are reports now that the Ukrainians are starting to go on the defensive, that they're digging in. The reason that's worrisome is if you're digging in, you're not moving ahead, right? You're basically digging in to try to stop the guy from moving towards you. That would suggest that a lot of the counteroffensive might be over at this point, right? That this big push over the last 6 months to try to move ahead didn't get to move ahead very far. I mean, we know this, but it still is concerning because the longer you sort of dig in, the longer it gives the Russians to keep developing their defenses, which only makes it harder to eventually take it back. Hungary. So Hungarian Prime Minister Orban, who's an idiot, far-right extremist, really pro-Russian, anti-Ukrainian, and in part anti-Ukrainian because he's pro-Russian. He is now demanding that the European Union drop Ukraine's membership at its next meeting, take it off the agenda because he says he's going to veto it. I really hope the European Union with him, but also NATO with Turkey, figure out how to treat these guys a little harsher. As far as, because honestly, if he's going to do Putin's bidding, he shouldn't be in the EU. I mean, that's sort of the bottom line, and that's exactly what he's doing. There's a report out of Britain today from the Guardian newspaper that Russian and Chinese-linked cyber groups have hacked a major nuclear waste site in the UK. The site has the largest store of plutonium on the planet. It is a sprawling dump for nuclear waste from weapons and decades of atomic power generators. Finnish papers report that Russia planned a campaign to hurt Finland and Sweden, their NATO memberships. Remember, right after the war breaks out, the support for joining NATO soars in Finland and Sweden, which at that point were not members of NATO. They were independent, or I forgot, neutral, but neutral friends of the West. They weren't exactly neutral friends of Russia, right? They were neutral friends of NATO. Then Russia invades Ukraine, and Finland and Sweden say, that's it. We're on the border here. We don't trust you. We want to join NATO. Finland gets to join. Turkey and Hungary are still playing games with Sweden joining. No update on that. Maybe in the next few weeks, there'll be some updates. Well, the Finnish papers are saying that the Russians came up with a whole disinformation plan to try to derail the efforts for Finland and Sweden to join NATO. And among other things, they were basically trying to harm relations between those two countries and Turkey to play on the Muslim factor, which in fact did happen with Sweden especially. They say, listen to this. Let me see this. It included plans to mock Turkey and its president, including promoting anti-Turkish protests and spreading, thank you, Dawn, and spreading anti-Erdogan, who's the president of Turkey, anti-Erdogan graffiti all over Europe. Now, what's interesting about that, remember when this war with Israel and Hamas began on October 7th? Thank you, Sean. And we saw all those swastikas pop up around France on Jewish buildings, like homes of Jewish people and Jewish businesses and Jewish schools. There were reports at the time, remember, that they arrested a couple, I think from Moldova, who said they were getting their orders from somebody over in Russia. Thank you, Dawn and Sean, if I didn't thank you guys, that they were getting their orders from somebody in Russia. So, very decent chance that some of what we're seeing in Europe is the Russians themselves, which is really shitty. Russia. So a couple days ago, thank you, Janice, I had reported on the fact that the Russians had passed, I think, I don't remember if it was it was a Supreme Court ruling, I think, actually. I think it was a Supreme Court ruling. I don't think it was it was a Supreme Court. Yeah. So yes, the Supreme Court in Russia banned what it called the global LGBT movement. So basically the global gay and trans movement. They said everybody's extremists and they were going to be banned in Russia, leading people to wonder, like, are they banning gay people? Well, it seems like they are. The Russians this weekend launched a series of raids on gay clubs and bars across Moscow. Police searched the venues. Thank you, Sean. Police searched the venues. They demanded people's documents, and they were photographing people's documents for security reasons. So in other words, making lists of people who are gay, bi, and trans. Okay. Lovely. And final thing, there's a final story from Ukraine. It's funny. I whipped through maybe because I just had my coffee. I whipped through the Ukraine stories. Final story from Ukraine that is troublesome. And I put it last just so I could kind of explain it and leave it with you guys, because I think this is almost the most important story. Thank you, C3. Quick sip of water. Thank you, John. So I know global LGBT movement. There must be a secret ring or something we could all have. Thank you, Isa. So the story out of Ukraine is, remember the two guys that are twins, mayor of Kyiv, and I forget the job of the other guy, the Klitschko brothers, and they're ginormous. Remember, these guys are like 7 feet tall, like, 2 meters and then 2 meters and then this much more. I mean, they're like monsters. Well, the one of them who's the mayor of Kyiv does a couple interviews. Listen to what he's saying in these interviews about Zelensky. Okay, listen to this. Zelensky is, quote, Zelensky is paying for mistakes he made about the war at the beginning, and the Ukrainian people are wondering why the country was not better prepared, he says. He says Ukrainians are losing trust in Zelensky's handling of the crisis. And then he goes on and he talks about at the very beginning how Zelensky, I think, was saying the Russians wouldn't invade, and they did, putting out a lot of negative stuff about Zelensky's, leadership, right? Then and there's a lot more quotes. I'm not going to go through all of them now. He tells the German news magazine Der Spiegel, second interview, he says, mind you, this is 2 interviews now, which means this is exactly a possible election coming up, except currently they're not having an election next year, but possible election, right? So maybe this is what he's doing. He then gives an interview to Der Spiegel, second publication, and is saying the same kind of stuff. Now, one time could be a mistake. Twice is a plan, right? So he planned to do this. That's why he's saying it repeatedly. Listen to this. He tells Der Spiegel in a separate interview, at some point, we will no longer be any different from Russia, where everything depends on the whim of one man. Now, that's really bad. Thank you, Andre. I don't know Ukrainian politics well enough to know exactly what's going on, if this is just electoral or what, but that's very bad. It's not beneficial to the politics overall. It's not beneficial to have this stuff pop up publicly. It's what worries me to some degree is that, well, and I think, right, people probably are less happy with Zelensky because, let's face it, Ukraine's not doing as well in the war, right? And in a democracy, you hold not in a democracy, thank you, Critter, you hold the top guy or top gal responsible, obviously, right? But what worries me is they're doing it publicly. Publicly is a lot worse, right? Publicly means there's a lot of frustration if it's coming public. And I worry that the public, I worry that it's happening because Ukrainians are starting to get worried about where the war is going, right? Because typically there's 2 things going on here, right? Thank you, Critter. One, possible election. So this could be people trying to succeed Zelensky, right? Or succeed Zelensky. The other thing, though, thank you, Irene, is I worry that it's a sign of Ukrainians starting to get a little despondent about the war, and they're starting to point fingers and cast blame, like who's responsible for losing, so to speak. Even though I don't think they've lost, that I think it is a sign of that, of of a little bit of a decrease of morale, which is not helpful because that doesn't help the war effort. Any case, all right, I'm going to switch over to Israel. Israel news isn't that long, but there's some important stuff going on, and then we'll do questions, guys. As always, like I said, please do keep the gifts coming. The gifts on TikTok, super chat, super questions, or super stickers, gifts on TikTok. I'm sorry, YouTube. I meant TikTok because these. Basically, I do this full time, and the only way I can afford to do this is with your guys' gifts. That is literally how I pay the bills. Also, memberships. We got memberships. You can join and give a contribution a month at a time on TikTok, on YouTube, on Ko-fi, on Twitch, on Discord. You guys can find it right on TikTok in my bio. Look for subscriptions. On YouTube, it should be at the bottom of the screen by the comment box, $, click it, and you'll see memberships or something. And for the rest of you, you can go to aravosis.com. Beep, 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 beep. Thank you, Lisa, and 863. And Tom, you can also, you guys on TikTok can just go to aravosis.com, or you can go back to my link. Thank you, Ellie and Amy. You can go back to my link in the bio and click it, and you'll see all the different options you can help out. Memberships, PayPal, etc. So thank you. And thank you, Marcy. Thanks, guys, for the gifts. I appreciate it. All right, let's do some Israel. So the big news from Israel today, the Israeli Defense Forces are saying that they are nearly completed with their objectives in northern Gaza. Now, remember, okay, sip of water, and I always like to summarize, because one of the things I learned in politics was, well, two things, I guess. One, working for people that aren't always smart, so you have to remind them of stuff. The other thing is working for people who are busy. And busy people don't always follow stuff as much as you do. And it's a complaint I often have about politics, that people sort of assume you remember everything or you know everything that they've read all day. So anyway, I don't like to speak down to people, but I do like to give you a little more background. So background of this, right? October 7th, Hamas terrorist group, thank you, Springer, or SR Ginger, sorry. Hamas terrorist group in Gaza that runs Gaza, invades Israel, like 1,000 men or 2,000 men. They attack all sorts of different Israeli towns. They attack military bases, kill 1,200 people, and take a lot of hostages, 240 hostages. They kill soldiers, but they also kill a lot of civilians. They take soldiers hostages, but a lot of civilian hostages, okay, as well. And then Israel retaliates and says, that's it. This is, because keep in mind, Israel has 10 million people. So killing 1,200 people would be akin to an American population of 330 million. That would be like killing 46,000 people. Thank you, Western. 46,000 people, huge, right, in one day. So Israel takes this as 9/11, September 11th equivalent, right? Or take your country's example, 7/7, whatever it would be for your country that's as big. So Israel says, that's it. We've got to take out Hamas. They invade Gaza. They try to take the lead. Hamas, by the way, hides among civilians. Therefore, a lot of civilians get killed in Gaza because the Israelis are trying to hit Hamas, but Hamas is behind the civilians, so they bomb the civilians, right? Bad situation all around. There's a ceasefire last week. Ceasefire goes for maybe 6-7 days and finally breaks down because Hamas started playing games with the hostages. The deal with the ceasefire was every day both sides will prepare a list of the hostages to be released. 10 Hamas hostages. Thank you, Simon. 30 Israeli prisoners, prisoners that Israel is holding, Palestinian prisoners. And thank you, Shazir. And every day they will prepare a list. Thank you, Eva. Both sides will agree to the list. And then, boom, there's another ceasefire for a day when they release these people to each other, right? Well, the Hamas started playing games. Thank you, Russell and Simon. Hamas started playing games. They started saying, oh, we don't have any more women and children because women and children came first, according to the agreement. We don't have any more. The Israelis are like, okay, Qatar, the independent, not even independent, Arab country negotiating, says you do. The Red Cross says you do. Oh, dropping my mic here. Nope. Says you do. We know you've got more women and children. And the Palestinians say, well, we've got more women, but we think they're Israeli soldiers. The Israelis say, no, they're not. These are women you picked up at the music festival. And the Palestinians go, yeah, but we still think they're soldiers. So there's a whole kind of dance going on. Well, that was the first problem. They couldn't agree to any more women being released. That was the first sort of violation, because you have to keep releasing women and children or the ceasefire ends. Second of all, terrorist attack in East Jerusalem. Hamas admitted to this. Hamas sent a group of men in a car with M16s and pistols, I believe, opened fire on a bus stop and killed a bunch of 4 civilians killed. Just got out of the car, people at a bus stop, just killed them all, shot them all. That's the second violation. Third violation, Hamas, or I should say one of the groups, who was that? Thank you. Who was that for saying Mackenzie? Thank you. The third violation was one of the groups in Gaza fired a rocket at Israel. That's the third violation. Israel said, okay, that's it. Ceasefire is over. Fighting starts again. So you get to where we are now. It's been a few days of the fighting starting again. Thank you, Debbie. And Gaza is pretty, I keep forgetting to print out my Gaza map. Gaza is pretty much a territory like this. Okay, you've got Israel kind of like this. Gaza is in the bottom left corner of Israel. Okay, it's right by the sea. It's right next to Egypt. And Gaza itself is maybe this big, like kind of a rectangle. Okay, the Israelis invaded the first third of Gaza, maybe the top third or so, maybe top 40%. And they're clearing Hamas out of there. The Israeli goal is to destroy Hamas, to take away their weapons and take them out of power, right? So they can't attack Israel again. They've gone after the top third, top 40%. And now they say they're almost done, nearly completed is the quote with the top part. Thank you, Tom. And they're now going after the southern part of Gaza. It was not clear when this was going to happen. That's the big news of today, is the satellite images are showing that the Israelis have in fact invaded southern Gaza. They're going after the town of, I think it's called Khan. I don't know how it's pronounced. It's spelled Khan Yunis in English. I don't know if it's Khan Yunis or how you guys say it. Thank you, Bob. But it's the big town in the south. The big town in the north is Gaza City. Big town in the south is this Khan Yunis. That's where the Israelis are going now. They have dropped leaflets telling people to evacuate. It gets a little complicated here. Let me, 1 second, sip of water. Thank you, Bob and Tom. Who is this? Dad over and Tom. A little complicated for a variety of reasons. One, the Israelis are telling the Palestinians to evacuate. One, a lot of the Palestinians say, well, but you told us before to evacuate, right? We already left where we left, and now we're here. And now you're telling us to leave here. Where the hell do we go? Part of the problem is they're not being allowed back in the north. Now, there may be a reason for that, right? In the north, they were fighting, and they said, leave so we can go after Hamas, which, again, Hamas hides behind civilians so we don't kill civilians. They go after the north. They're not done in the north, so they're not letting civilians come back yet. So if you're not letting civilians go back to the north, but you're saying in the south, leave the big city, where do you go, right? You can't cross the border into Israel. And frankly, that makes sense. I don't blame Israel, right? Why let them into Israel? But Egypt, that controls the other border, won't let them into Egypt. So you've got a little bit of a conundrum here of telling them to leave, but there's nowhere to go. The second problem is the Israelis are providing, basically they're dropping pieces of paper, and the paper have like the QR code on it that you can scan with your phone. But when they invaded the first time, but also the second time now going after the south, there's a telecommunications blackout. There's power, there's phone, there's internet blacked out. If you don't have internet power and data for your telephone, you can't scan the QR code and get the maps that tell you what's safe. So there is understandable frustration from the international organizations. Sometimes the UN, I'm a little suspicious of. I will say it's a little bit difficult to tell people to evacuate. Where do they go, right? So that's a huge problem right now. The international aid groups are saying that a lot more civilians are getting killed with Israel now moving into this town. Israel says that Hamas basically has put up camp in this town, that's where they're hiding now, because they cleared them out of the north. They're in the south now in this town. So that's what, thank you, Maddie. So that's kind of what's, I'm trying to look here because I gave a summary of a lot of the different news that I was going to tell you anyway. Let me tell you here. Kamala Harris. So this was interesting. Kamala Harris, our vice president, was traveling around the Middle East this weekend and gave a speech or said in a meeting with the Egyptian president, which was interesting, which was a change of tone for Washington, meaning being a little more stern with Israel, which was interesting. I will say this, though. It's interesting she said it and not Biden. So I will read you what she said. But what's interesting is it means, A, the Biden administration is being more critical of Israel than they've been before about the civilian casualties. But they're still having Kamala Harris say it and not Biden, which makes it a little weaker. It's stronger if the president says it. It's a touch weaker when someone else says it. But she's the vice president, so it's still pretty high up. Do you see what I'm saying? There's kind of a... Thank you, Maddie. There's kind of a game being played a little bit with the White House where they're trying to sort of scold Israel, but not do it too much, but still do it pretty strong. They're playing a little bit of a game is all I'm saying here. Not necessarily a bad game, but they're trying to be nuanced. So here's what she said. She said, under no circumstances will the United States permit the forced relocation of Palestinians from Gaza or the West Bank. Now, let me stop right there. Forced relocation is interesting. Does she mean for the current attack? In other words, does she mean when you said they should leave and go somewhere else so you can attack, we're not going to allow that? Or does she mean we don't want you taking over the territory and basically kicking people out and occupying the territory as part of Israel, right? You start to bring in settlements, you start to bring in stuff like that. I guarantee you she means the second part. I don't know if she means the first part, right? That we don't want people to leave town so you can bomb and then come back. I'm thinking, though, she may mean they don't want that either. Let me read this again. Under no circumstance will the United States permit the forced relocation of Palestinians from Gaza or the West Bank. The besiegement of Gaza, not sure what that word even means in this case. You know what I mean? Like the besiegement. Isn't it already a siege of Gaza? So I don't quite. And by the way, besiegement is not a word we use in English, in American English. It just isn't a word you normally would use. So I don't even know what they're trying to signal. I wouldn't have written it. Put it that way. If you're trying to get your point across, you don't use a word that we don't normally use because then people go, I don't know what that, I mean, I know what the word means, but we don't use it. So I don't know what it's supposed to mean. Or the redrawing of the borders of Gaza. Okay, fair enough. We know what that means. Meaning, as I told you, they don't want them to start to carve up Gaza and say, nope, we're taking part of it for Israel, et cetera, right? She said Saturday also that while the U.S. supports Israel's legitimate military objectives in Gaza, the civilian suffering inside the enclave has been too high. That's interesting. Too many innocent Palestinians have been killed. Frankly, the scale of civilian suffering and the images and videos coming from Gaza are devastating. It is truly heartbreaking. That's interesting. That is, I would say, the strongest message the administration has been sending so far, saying you've got to watch the civilian casualties. Final point, though, I found this quote as well, which is interesting because the second quote is kind of the opposite in the extreme. Listen to this. When this conflict ends, Hamas cannot control Gaza and Israel must be secure. I mean, right? Like, okay, how do you tell Israel you're killing too many civilians, but at the same time, Hamas, this conflict will not end until Hamas is no longer in control of Gaza and Israel is secure, which I think is a fine goal. But how do you do that when Hamas hides underneath and behind civilians? Thank you, Sherry and Daryl, right? If Hamas is hiding behind civilians, how do you, this is the thing that I've raised from the beginning with you guys. Hamas uses civilians as human shields. They literally have tunnels under civilian, all over the place, but especially under civilian buildings, because this way you've got to kill civilians. Thank you, Alexander. You've got to kill civilians if you want to go after Hamas. So it's perfect for them because either you don't attack Hamas because they're under civilians, or you kill civilians to get to Hamas, and then you make Israel look horrible, right? Everything happening now. You turn the world against them, protests, the whole story becomes how bad Israel is and not how bad Hamas is. So from Hamas's perspective, it's great either way. But I'm just saying, like, I think the U.S. is still not playing a game. I don't want to use that phrase. I think the U.S. goals do not meet, in my view. It is difficult to tell Israel, don't kill so many civilians, but at the same time, go ahead and remove Hamas from power and take away their weapons. I don't know how you remove Hamas from power without civilians dying, without a significant number of civilians dying, because Hamas is hiding behind civilians. I'm not convinced you therefore just let Hamas survive and keep controlling Gaza, because then the problem is you send the message that, hey, go and commit terrorist attacks. Just make sure you use civilians as shields. Any terrorist in the world, use civilians as shields, and we'll let you get away with it. Because then you're putting a target on all civilians everywhere. So I don't know. I just think I think it's good the U.S. is warning about civilians. I still think U.S. policy is a bit like contradictory to some degree. What else we got? Our hostages. So the hostage situation, nothing happening with the hostages now, obviously. The major reason for the impasse remained unchanged. As I mentioned before, Hamas is refusing to release a remaining group of young women. They say that they're military or whatever, and they want to talk about men instead, because Hamas is still holding a lot of men. There are reports from Israel that, I will say, I have not seen this substantiated yet, but there have been a lot of reports on it. So I'd like to see more reporting on this, that that Hamas won't release the women because they don't want the women to report on how they've been treated, meaning rape, abuse, etc., treatment of women, that if they release these remaining group of women, because especially think about it too, there's a kernel of truth here. If Hamas thinks these remaining women are Israeli military, they're probably going to be treated a lot worse than the other women, right? I mean, obviously, they've killed a lot of women anyway. I mean, horrifically, right? I mean, we know that. They've raped women. I mean, we know that. But if you've got a group of women hostages that are civilians and a group of women hostages that are military, there's a good chance Hamas, a terrorist group, is going to mistreat the military female hostages much more than the regular ones. So anyway, the story is that they're afraid of releasing these last group of women because they've mistreated them in some way. As I said, I'd like to see more reporting on that. It's certainly possible, but I'd like to see more reporting on that before I believe it. Two last little stories here. Let me see here. Okay, we've got that. Finally, so the final story, kind of weird, just kind of a weird little final story. Israeli authorities are investigating claims by U.S. researchers that some investors did short trades on stock trades on Israeli stocks right before the attack on the terrorist attacks on October 7th. I am loath to explain short trading, but the easiest way to explain it is a way of making money by predicting if stocks are going to go up or down. So rather than just buying stocks and if they go up, you sell or whatever, right? You're buying an instrument that is a guess on whether stocks are going up. Thank you, Derek. So for example, you could spend $1 million on October 7th was the attack, right? On October 5th, you spend $1 million saying, I think Israeli stocks are going to drop 20% in 2 days. And most people would say, well, that's crazy. That's not going to happen. So go for it. Put that $1 million in there, and your return, you could make maybe $100 million, because it's almost like betting on a horse. You're betting on a horse that's a wild, crazy bet, right? So that you can make a lot of money on it. Well, these guys did the same thing. They did short selling, where basically they invested in a way that predicted the market was going to drop massively on October 7th, and they would make a lot of money. The amount I saw was somewhere between like 500 million and $1 billion. They talked about billions of shekels, which is, almost $1 billion you get to, okay? A huge amount, right? Well, if this is true that this happened, it's clearly insider trading. It's clearly somebody who knew the attack was coming. And the question becomes, was it Hamas? Was it Iran? Was it Hezbollah, right? The terrorist group in southern Lebanon? Could it have been the Russians? I mean, who else may have known that the attack was coming? If they can discern, A, that for sure this happened, and B, who it was, it gets interesting, because like, what happens if they find out it was the Russians? Right? Like the Russians knew. What happens if they find out it was somebody in Saudi Arabia who knew, right? Like countries that supposedly are a little more, I don't want to say in the middle, right? But aren't, wouldn't have a hand in it, that they actually knew about it and made money. So it's a very interesting story in that case, I think. Lamb Chop is saying this can be tracked. Yeah, I'm curious, to what degree you can hide it or not, Just very interesting. Well, no, the point is, Callum, but if the U.S. warred Israel, but here's the thing. It was for that day. They knew it was coming that day, right? So this wasn't, remember, a year ago, Israel had the documents saying they're planning this, right? And this summer, the Palestinians Hamas was having trial runs of this, but there was no information saying October 7th is when it's happening. These bets happened basically targeted at October 7th. Or around October 7th. It makes it look like somebody knew the exact date. And that's suspicious. All right, guys, that is it for Ukraine and Israel. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. Let me look at 6 Evo's question real quick. Thank you, Maddie. I haven't seen the lemonade in a while. I always liked that one. Thank you. 6 Evo says, with Israel now moving into southern Gaza, can that lead Iran or other terrorist groups to join the war and help Hamas? Maybe. The situation becomes, so the calculus becomes whether it's Israel, or Iran, or Hezbollah that runs southern Lebanon, the terrorist group there. neither has entered the war in a big way. They've entered the war in a small way. Iran has its surrogates kind of throwing stuff at us, at U.S. ships, at U.S. troops in the Middle East. Hezbollah is launching missiles, rockets from southern Lebanon, but they haven't done a big invasion, right? And the concern is that either of those enter in a big way, but they haven't. So you've got to analyze why they haven't, and then see, does Israel moving into southern Gaza change anything? I would guess that Hezbollah and Iran I'm not trying to speak a double negative here. Have not yet entered the war, not because Israel didn't invade southern Gaza. They didn't say, oh boy, if it's something, I think Iran or somebody did say this. One of them did say, oh yeah, if you go after all of Gaza, we're coming in. I don't think that's why though. I suspect it's U.S. influence. It's British influence. It's moving our aircraft carriers and our troops to the area where we said we're going to bomb the crap out of you if you enter the war. And Iran knows it. And Hezbollah itself may know it. Also, Hezbollah, you never know. Iran may be telling Hezbollah to hold off because of it. But if the reason that Iran is holding off is because we threaten to blow them out of the sky or blow them out of the ground, that doesn't change if Israel invades southern Gaza, right? Iran's calculus is still, I don't want America to blow me up. And America's still going to blow me up if Israel invades southern Gaza, so it doesn't change my calculus, right? So my answer would be, it's possible. It's possible it pisses off Hezbollah enough that they do something. Yeah, it's possible. It's possible. It just depends what's motivating each of them, right? That's sort of the question. All right. So, okay, let me, I will show you guys really quick 2 auction items because our auctions this week are a big deal. I put up like 15 auction items. We do this to raise money for Ukraine. Basically, 50% of our auctions, the money goes back to Ukraine. The other 50% supports me because I do this full time. This is my job. That's my income. The gifts you guys do, so please keep the gifts coming, and the auction monies and things like that. I put up like 15 auction items, the most ever, because we're getting to the point where in the U.S. our auctions end on Wednesday. This will be the last auction where I think pretty much we can guarantee in the U.S. you'll get it for Christmas. I fly to Arizona next week, which means I'm not going to hold an auction next week. So there's not going to be time for you to get stuff for Christmas. So I will just show you 2 of the items, and then you can go check out the auctions are on Discord. It's really cool stuff. Thank you, Kelly. The auctions are at discord.aravosis.com, and you can also just go on Discord if you have a Discord. Go to Discord, search for Aravosis. You'll find my thing. So the 2 cool items. This one is probably the favorite. This is an old Russian, former, I should say, Russian shell, military shell, used, we think, from an armored personnel carrier, some kind of a very large gun there. And the Ukrainians turned it into trench art. Basically, they carved the Ukrainian trident in it, and the back is an angel. It's really cool. I love this thing. So the back is an angel. This one is not buffed. Some of them are polished. This one is not, but it's really cool. And it would make like a neat candle holder. Lots of things you can do. It's metal, and it's also nice because it's right? It stands up, which is really cool. This, I think, is a fabulous gift, well, for yourself or somebody else. The shell was used in Bakhmut, which is cool because Bakhmut is one of the biggest battles in Ukraine. So very cool. The other item I'll show you, and the rest, like I said, there's 15 you can find there, this is also very cool. This is the last one I've got. It is a patch of the Azov battalion in Ukraine. This is a new patch. This one's kind of neat because it has a Velcro backing. So you basically can sew the Velcro onto something and then attach it that way. Honestly, you're probably just as good sewing this onto something, to be honest. But this one's very cool. The Azov battalion are the Ukrainian troops, most of them, as you were there, that defended the Azovstal steel plant against the Russians for 2 months. Remember, the 2,000 Ukrainians held off the 14,000 Russians. Like 1,000 of the 2,000 Ukrainians were these guys. So it says Azov. It shows Crimea. I don't know why it shows Crimea, but it shows Crimea, which may be somebody that understands Azov better than I do, meaning the battalion. But this is a neat patch. And by the way, the Russians hate these guys. So it's just like added joy. But this is a new patch. It's not used, but very cool. Okay. You can find both of those over at our Discord, discord.aravosis.com. All right. Let's do Q&A. Questions, answers, Ukraine, Israel, anything, politics. Let's go for it. I don't know, Terry. I have no idea. Terry says, do you expect the U.S. to activate a third carrier strike force and send it to the, oh, you mean over there? You know, I meant to double check this weekend as to where the U.S. carriers are, and the British one as well. Are they all in the Eastern Mediterranean, or are any of them in the Persian Gulf? Because I didn't really get to it, but there have been multiple incursions with the Houthis again this weekend. Remember the radical group that's running part of Yemen, and they keep shooting cruise missiles and drones. And whether they're at Israel, whether they're at U.S. ships, whether they're at commercial ships, there's been attacks on commercial ships in the area that the U.S. ships have helped. There seems to be an increase in activity, and the Houthis, along with Hamas and Hezbollah, are basically another group that's in cahoots with the Iranians, right? But I didn't see it's Mediterranean and Gulf. Okay, that's what I was wondering. Yeah, because the question. Let's see here. The question becomes. I don't know. The question becomes whether we think have enough and where the activity is happening. If we're worrying that the Houthis are starting to get a little crazier, or the Iranians, we might put another, more ships in the Persian Gulf to be able to take on the Iranians and the Houthis in Yemen. If we're a little more worried about Gaza and Hezbollah, then we put somebody in the Mediterranean. I don't know. But I don't know whether I would say if we see somebody else get sent there, it means our concern is increasing, obviously. But I don't know. Phoenix, I'm going to visit my nephews for the week, and I'll keep reporting from there. But I've never been since I was a kid, and it was time. I haven't done a vacation. I couldn't tell you the last time I've had a vacation, so I figured I'd do a vacation, still do some work from there. But MB says, can the USA do anything to stop both wars that all countries would listen to? When you say both wars, what do you mean? I mean, I assume you mean the Middle East. Do you mean both sides in the war? I'm not sure what you mean. If you mean the Middle East, the problem is how, right? I mean, this is actually very much like Ukraine in a way. Ukraine could end the war today by just, end it, stop fighting and hope the Russians stop fighting. But then Ukraine just gave up like 17% of its territory. There is YouTube. Okay, YouTube's back now. I was saying if Israel were to possible, but if the U.S. put pressure to stop Israel from fighting, A, Hamas would have to stop too, and B, that doesn't really solve anything. Right? Hamas is still in power. Hamas still has all their weapons. Hamas still has most of its men. And in a few months, Hamas does it again. Solar flares. It could be solar flares, actually. Hamas invades Israel again and kills another 1,200 people. Right? They could just keep doing it. Now, on YouTube, I'm assuming it's back. Is it back? Sorry, my YouTube had frozen, and I don't know if it's actually back for folks. I'm sending them a quick message just to see, and then we'll continue here. I may have to reboot my to refresh my screen for YouTube. It's back. Okay, it's back. Good. Israel's not going to kill all of the Palestinians. No. What do you mean? Is that what you're asking? No. If that's what you mean, no. Can Israel do something that wins the hearts of the Palestinians? I don't know how, though. I mean, I don't know how. What do they do? Right? The problem is Hamas is across the border. Hamas just killed 1,200 of your citizens. Hamas is threatening to do it again and again and again. You've got to take them out. And what do you do? If you don't take them out, that's not acceptable, right? If the world now, this is why some people don't like the notion of a ceasefire, because it's too cute. Okay, it's cute to say let's just all stop fighting. Well, what the hell does that do, right? You're gonna leave Hamas, like I said, you're gonna leave Hamas there with all their weapons and all their men to attack again in a month, and Israel's supposed to then let them kill another 1,200 people and not respond because that would be right. I mean, it doesn't. You have to have a ceasefire that then something else happens, right? Is the world going to get together and remove Hamas somehow? Thank you, Mustard. That might there you might have a ceasefire. If the world had some way to get rid of Hamas and put a normal government in charge of Gaza, then you could have a ceasefire, because Israel, we could force Israel to say, stop going after them. We're all getting together and we're going to get rid of Hamas. But how do you do that? Right? And there's also no plan to do that. This is why and this, by the way, same thing with Ukraine, in the sense that anybody who's been following our Ukraine coverage, we've been saying from the beginning that this ceasefire, people talking about a ceasefire in Ukraine are people that are trying to help the Russians. It sounds cute, because who doesn't like a ceasefire, right? I mean, your question, which is a good question, you said, is there some way to weigh in and stop the fighting? Generally speaking, we like stopping fighting, right? Right? We like that. It sounds good. But in Ukraine, when the other guy invades you for no reason, steals 17% of your country, if you stop the fighting, then you've given him 17% of your country. And you've told him, you know what? If you invade and do all of this, it's worth it, because eventually we're going to stop the fighting, have a ceasefire, and in 5 years, do it again. Go in and take another 20% of Ukraine, and we'll have another ceasefire, right? So ceasefires don't do anything unless you figure out some kind of security arrangement to stop another war from happening. And that's the problem here. Is also, ceasefire doesn't really help because they're still holding hostages too. But there's no, in Israel, there's no nobody has actually explained what happens next after a ceasefire to make sure Hamas doesn't do this again, and that Hamas is no longer in charge of Gaza. And that's the conundrum. That's the conundrum, you know? And I think the world needs to come up with that. Don't know what it is, but they need to. Well, Black Panther, says, what has the IDF been doing daily for 75 years? The same thing the Palestinians have been doing daily for 75 years, fighting and killing. So, got news for you. The Israelis and the Palestinians equally have got unclean hands, I would say. Each has had problems. But the Israelis are not the bad guys, and the Palestinians are not the good guys. The Palestinians have spent 75 years murdering civilians worldwide, and the Israelis have done a lot of bad things as well in that time as well. So, and by the way, this is where you really can test it, because the fact that I just blamed both sides, anybody who goes crazy, in my view, you got issues. Because if you're not willing to admit that both sides share some blame here, then I really don't. I think people who aren't willing to admit both sides share some blames, they're both bad neighbors. That's a funny way of putting it. I like that. Fred and Man says they're both bad neighbors. That's not a bad way of putting it, No, and the problem is Israel's had some crazy governments, especially the last 20 years, some crazy right-wing governments that are horrific. The Palestinians, well, they have a government that's a terrorist group, but also got news for you. And I think it's young people. Young people like to kind of look and say, look, they want to look at the last 10, 20 years, right? They don't want to look at the last 75 years. They mentioned 75 years, but they really don't. The last 20 years, most of the news has been about Israel occupying and doing bad things, right, to the Palestinians. Most people don't look back further and say, well, why is it Israel's occupying? Is it because the Palestinians and their Arab friends invaded again and again and again because they wanted to kill all the Jews? Yes, it is, right? But, it gets more complicated when you look at it. Is it because of 75 years of Palestinian terrorism? Taking cruise ships hostage and shooting to death old Jewish men in wheelchairs and throwing them overboard? His name is Leon Klinghoffer, by the way. Yes, it is. Is it hijacking airplanes around there? The reason you all have to go through security at the airport is because of Palestinian terrorists. You may not have known that. That's why. They raised terrorism to an art form. They had massive numbers of hijackings, and that's why we now have security at the airports, because of them. Now, again, the Israelis, lots of problems too. I saw some pictures today of I think it was Palestinians bloody in the West Bank because more of these crazy Israeli settlers are going after them. That's not acceptable either. Well, again, I've said I don't like Netanyahu, but boy, oh boy, oh boy, it's a lot. To say one side is innocent is bullshit, as far as I'm concerned. Absolute bullshit. But young people today, I think a lot of young people, they know half the story. because they know what they've seen in the news. And in the news recently, it's been a lot of Palestinians dying, and you think Israel bad. You don't realize that Israelis and Jews and innocent people who aren't even Jews around the world have been killed by Palestinians for 75 years in horrific, horrific, horrific terrorist attacks. Horrific. I mean, unfortunately, the Palestinians created modern terrorism, guys. And again, Israel, not going to defend Israel on this either. But you're nuts if you think Israel's the only bad guy here. You know? So, anyway. So, we may not, but that's okay. Yeah, but I trust you. I trust you. I don't trust everybody. No, you may not agree. I don't mind if people don't agree. I think honest people can disagree on this. I do think, and I've had some people do this, people on this topic who do you're evil because you disagree, then I think you're an idiot. Whether you're on the Israeli side or the Arab side, you're an idiot if you do this. You're all evil. Give me a break. You know? I mean, give me a break. Anyway, thank you. Who is that with thank you, Sean, for the leave. Baltic states. I don't think the Baltic states are really at any real risk of being attacked by the Russians. Thank you, Cerveza. The Baltic states are Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia. They are members of NATO. Russia ain't invading because Russia would be going to war with America. The Russians have been yet again, I think this weekend they did it again, threatening the Baltic states, threatening Poland. They like to do this. They're in Finland now too. The Russians are bullies. And in part they're bullies because they know they've lost, right? The Russian Empire, they're not the Soviet Union. People don't fear them anymore. I mean, they're a pain in the ass. Look what the damage they're doing to Ukraine. They have a lot of ability to do damage to their neighbors, but they can't touch NATO. NATO is stronger than them, and they know it, and it pisses them off. So they like to threaten the Baltic states just to scare you guys, but look what they're doing to Finland. All they can do to Finland is throw a bunch of migrants at the border. That's all they can do to try to cause trouble or cut a cable in the sea. They can't actually attack you, right? I mean, Finland's the wider area, but they can't actually attack you because you got NATO now. I mean, you guys have had NATO for a while in the Baltic states. You've got NATO. We're going to defend you. And the Russians know it, and it pisses them off. So all they can do is scare you and scare you and scare you because that's what they do. Yeah. No, it's, again, there's always a chance of Russia doing it, but if it is, then we're going to war. And I don't think Russia wants to go to war with America and Britain and everybody else. Norway, good luck with that, So, Ukraine is digging in. Richard's saying, you said earlier Ukraine's digging in. Is that because of winter coming? Who knows what their motivation is? I will tell you, I think it's a combination of it's winter, so it's hard for them to move forward. Not even winter. We're in the almost winter where it's cold and rainy and snowy. So the ground is wet, which makes it very difficult to move ahead, right? With tanks and even troops. Once it gets frozen, it's easier to move ahead because then it's solid. Of course, it's freezing, and which is its own problem, right? But I think the concern is that the Ukrainians are digging in because as you said, they can't move forward if everything's wet and slushy, but also maybe they don't have the ability to move forward anymore because maybe the counteroffensive has come to an end or is coming to an end in certain areas. That's the concern. So yeah, are too many people buffering or not on TikTok? Some people were saying they're buffering, but hopefully not. It claims on my end that it's still pretty good. Okay, good. Back now? Okay. Waiting for solid ground for the Bradleys. Actually, Vlad raised a good point this weekend. On our live show, we do a show on the weekend for the monthly subscribers on TikTok and YouTube and everywhere as a thank you. And our friend Vlad in Ukraine was on, and we were asking any update on, for example, the American and the British tanks, right? The British Challenger tanks, the American Abrams tanks. And Vlad said no, but he threw out a point and he said, but I think he said it or one of you said it. I think Vlad said it. He said, but those tanks are meant for offensive operations. We're not doing offensive operations now because of the weather and everything else. So they're not really being used, or if they're being used, it's not in any big way, right? So that was an interesting point, I thought. It was a very interesting point. Thank you. Who's it, Al? Polonuk? I'll say Polonuk. No idea. Oh, what else we got, guys? we'll go a little bit longer. I'm not going too late tonight because we are going to go to a nearby town to check out the Christmas lights. They do a really beautiful Christmas light display in the center of town, and we were going to go check it out with my mom and get her nice and bundled up. So they made me promise not to go too late tonight so I can go eat really quick and then we can go. F-16s, F-16s may not be there until spring. That was the earliest we saw. That was the earliest. What will the background be in Phoenix? I don't know. We're going to be at my nephew's house, so we'll see what the background is. I have no idea. Oh, there's even more light. There are even more of the Aurora Borealis in Edinburgh. You're kidding. The Northern Lights. Oh, the Red Sea. Not really. I mean, do you mean the Houthis? I assume you mean, or what? I mean, there was a report from the Pentagon today. The Houthis are the guys in Yemen that have been throwing cruise missiles and, drones and attacking commercial shipping and stuff. And the Christmas lights. Yeah. I'll grab video of that. But the Pentagon did say today they're not convinced the Houthis are trying to attack American ships, which was interesting. So it may be that they're trying to go after commercial shipping. They're trying to go after the Israelis, and the Americans are kind of there and seeing it take off. So we're taking it down, right? We're shooting it out of the sky. But it may not be Iran trying to up the ante by going after us all the time. Who knows? Just looking here. Beep. Yeah, John Judge, it's bad. Yeah, I mean, no, John Judge is saying to attack Israel with Benji, I assume he means Netanyahu at the helm, was a deliberate move to harm Palestinians, meaning you intentionally wanted Israel to hit back hard. None of this is surprising, except why does Hamas hate Palestinians? I mean, it's an interesting question as to why Hamas feels no fealty or loyalty to the Palestinians, because it's clear they don't. I mean, they've said this before. First of all, you don't hide behind civilians if you care about civilians, right? Hamas doesn't care if Palestinians die, clearly. And they've said so, by the way. They've gotten asked repeatedly. They got asked about civilian deaths, and they said about Palestinian deaths, and they said, this is the cost of war. Martyrs is the cost of victory, was their answer. About that, they're willing to have Palestinians die for victory. And it was like, not the answer, if you cared. Also, they've said that, what was the other quote? Oh, yes. When they were asked about supplying the Palestinians with food and water and electricity and fuel because the Israelis had cut it off and this kind of stuff, right? And Hamas said, that's not our job. That's the United Nations' job. The United Nations is responsible for the Palestinian refugees, not us. I mean, it was just kind of like, dude, right? So, but I don't know. I don't know enough about sort of the history as to why it is that Hamas just doesn't care. I mean, you'd think they'd care, right? I mean, they're related or whatever you'd think, but I don't know. I don't know, John. Well, I think, look, it's an interesting question. Kolagranic says, I'm a millennial, but I get a lot of Gen Z stuff in my TikTok, and my daughter's 18. It's definitely the young people that are siding hardcore with Hamas for some reason. There is probably a lot of social media, probably TikTok. People are blaming TikTok for a lot of politics stuff. My guess is the Russians we already knew were very good at this, because look at all the stuff they did with the American elections. The Russians are very good at this. I think at the same time, Israel probably hasn't been very smart in how they've handled this, so that didn't help. Thank you, Olson. That probably didn't help. It's true that a lot of civilians do appear to be dying. You can't spin that, right? I mean, how do you spin I remember a quote years ago from somebody was, and I forgot who said it, but they said, you can't spin a dead body. And they meant figuratively, but they also meant literally. Like, if you've got people dying, good luck trying to spin that in a good way, right? So it's not easy for Israel to start with. But as I said, I think one of the key factors here for generations is my generation grew up watching Palestinian terrorists kill everybody around the world, not just Israelis, not just Jews, murderous killers. Your generation, if you've been following for the last 20 years, so if you're very young to maybe 30, your generation has been watching Israelis kill Palestinians. And you're thinking these guys are just like South Africans. All they want to do is kill dark people, right? And that, I think, is a difference right there on the age difference of just the news before 2000 was always about Palestinians, terrorists blowing people up around the world, and it was horrible. Absolutely. I mean, viciously horrible. After 2000 was poor Palestinian refugees getting killed by Israelis. So if you look at one, you blame Palestinians because they're all terrorists. If you look at the other, you blame Israelis because they're all terrorists, right? I think that's a huge reason right there. And you throw in social media, and for whatever reason, the Israelis, I think, have been horrible at public relations, and I think Hamas and the Palestinians and the Russians have been great at social media and public relations, how to spin all of this. So, and let's face it, a lot of Palestinians are dying. That doesn't look good, right? I mean, good luck trying to explain that, right? It's hard to explain that, So, but I think it's a combination of all of that. Oh, that's okay. I think I meant, yeah, it doesn't matter. That's fine. We got the main point across though. Israel controls the media. Yeah, they really don't. They really don't. If they did, they'd be winning all the media wars right now, and they're not. So, anyway, thank you, Color Granick. Well, I try. I mean, I've got my opinions. Look, the problem is everyone will try to show you both sides, but everyone's got their own opinions of what they think is correct. And, that's going to come across. I've got mine. You got yours. The thing I tell people is I just don't trust people on issues like this that are absolutely, if you disagree with me, you support genocide and there's a little bit, again, if you literally say you support genocide, that's a different story, right? But just because you disagree, I mean, give me a break. Anyway, no, it wasn't. Eric says before 1948, that state of Israel was Palestine. No, it wasn't. It didn't exist back then. Nobody existed back then. There was no Palestine. There was Britain back then. It was part of Britain. It was a British territory. There was no Palestine. A special live for Christmas. Depending, possibly. I mean, because like Christmas morning, we get together with the family like 11 to 12. We come over, get together, we cook, and then we eat around noon or 1. So I wouldn't be free then, but that morning, maybe 10 o'clock in the morning, I could go live a little bit and hang out. Possibly. Yeah. It wasn't Palestine back then. It was British Palestine, which is something totally different. Yeah. Well, it wasn't called Palestine. It was called Palestine. Come on, guys. Come on. I mean, first of all, this is also the problem. If you talk to people with the history, everyone's going to disagree about what was what with the history. Right. It was British land. It was Ottoman land. It was, by the way, guess if we're playing games with words, guess whose word was there first? Israelites. They were there thousands. How many years ago were the Israelites there? How many years, guys? Was it 2,000, 3,000? When were they there? 2,000 years? I always forget. So, I mean, don't play games with this. It's such bullshit. Who was there first? Come on. No, because you know what, too? Who was here first in America? The Native Americans, the Indians. So are we leaving? No, right? It's just, those kind of arguments to me are stupid. Because you know what, too? They're the arguments, by the way, what's really dangerous about that argument, it's the argument those Israeli settlers use. I've told you guys this. There was an Israeli settler on one of the news stations I was watching a couple weeks ago, and this woman goes in the West Bank, and she is one of these people that wants to kick all the Palestinians out of their homes because this land belongs to Israel. And the reporter's asking her why? Because the Bible says so. And she says all the Palestinians should be kicked out of the West Bank because the Bible told her so. And the Bible says this was Israel 3,000 years ago, and it's going to be Israel today. And I hear that crap and go, give me a break. Give me a break. That stuff just drives me nuts, right? You just can't play games because like I said, all of our land is stolen. Unless you go back to the Neanderthals, not the Neanderthals, you'd have to go back to who was Australopithecus or something before you get who stole whose land from whom, right? All the countries, as I always say. So does Strasbourg, France go back to Strasbourg, Germany again? I mean, like everybody's land gets stolen and mixed up. I don't buy it. I just don't buy it. Who's there first? Give me a break. Again, look at Europe. My God. Australopithecus probably stole land too. Yeah, but I'm serious. No, having said that, just because it was somebody's land before doesn't mean you ignore that, right? It depends. But as you go on it, for example, Israel exists and it's never going away, right? That's a given. That's a given. So we can't play games like that, right? But also, like I said, thank you, Dawn. You do get into the problem like America. Yeah, we treated the Native Americans horribly. It's too late. It doesn't mean we don't try to help now, but it's too late. They're not getting their country back. They're not, right? Or their land. They're not. Like, we're not giving them half of New York State, And I mean, you can acknowledge historically somebody was screwed, and at the same time say, but the solution isn't to give it back. Anyway, but also, as I said, the Jews and Israel, I say Jews meaning my Jewish friends who know this stuff in the States, and Israelis will tell you that even the argument about who was there first, not as easy as the Palestinian defenders will. You're going to run into a problem with that because the Jews were there first. So that's not a good way to do it. In any case. All right, guys, I'm going to go at 6:15. I've got Christmas lights with the family to go deal with. Thank you for joining us. All right. Thanks for the gifts, guys. I'll be back tomorrow. Today's Monday. Tomorrow's Tuesday, 6 o'clock Eastern time, US. I will be back. Merry Christmas from Israel. Thank you. I will be back to do this again tomorrow with the latest news from everywhere. And again, American news, if there's anything Trumpy going on or whatever. Thank you, Jeremy. Otherwise, thanks for joining. Thanks for the gifts. Thank you, moderators. I don't know. Has it been getting a little saner or not saner for the mods? I'm just curious on TikTok. TikTok is where usually it's crazy. Has TikTok been a little more sane or not so much? No, Ashley says nope. Sorry. Amanda says nope. Okay. Then you guys are doing a good job because I don't notice it as much. Thank you, Joe. I don't notice nearly as much of the crazy. So sorry. Thank you. All right. Mods do a good job. I know. They're like, all right, guys, then I'm going to sign off. I'll do some Christmas videos to put up on TikTok later, probably, and Discord. And otherwise, I'll see you guys tomorrow night, okay? All right? Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for the gifts and all. Do check out the Discord. Like I said, this is my biggest Discord auction yet, and I'm probably not even doing one next week. Or if I do, it's not going to end for 2 weeks because I'm not going to mail stuff from Arizona next week. So for Christmas stuff, this is it. So do go check it out. It's a lot of cool stuff, so. I intentionally put the cool stuff up and a lot of it. So thanks, guys. All right. Have a good night.